Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck number 242 and it's titled Vhal is Disturbing. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, our random card was suggested to us by Mort over on Discord, which, quick aside, if you would like to join my Discord, please check us out on Patreon or right here on YouTube as a channel member. But that card, which Mort suggested, is going to be Vhal Candlekeep Researcher. And Vhal is 3 and a blue for a 2/3 legendary creature human wizard. She's got vigilance, and she can tap to add an amount of colorless equal to Vhal's toughness, but this mana can't be spent to cast spells from your hand and choose a background. So, obviously, since Vhal is a legendary creature, she is going to be our commander this week, but because she can choose a background, we also have a background this week in Noble Heritage, which is 1 and a white for a legendary enchantment background that says commander creatures you own have, when this creature enters the battlefield and at the beginning of your upkeep, each player may put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control. For each opponent who does, you gain protection from that player until your next turn. Now, this is really good for multiple reasons. The first, obviously, protection. We want to make sure that we are protecting ourselves from our opponents, but we can put those 2 +1/+1 counters on Vhal. And since Vhal can tap for mana equal to her toughness, every time we put 2 +1/+1 counters on her, we are now able to make more and more mana. So that is going to be increasingly relevant as we move throughout this deck. And so we can start breaking down what exactly that means, let's take a look at some of our themes for this deck and break down what the deck is trying to do. Starting off with our namesake mechanic, we have Disturb. And Disturb is a very specific mechanic because it only came out in the most recent Innistrad set, and I believe only in Midnight Hunt for the humans that turn into spirits, and then only for Crimson Vow for the spirits that turn into enchantments. So we have both of those in the deck, and an example of what I'm talking about is Chaplain of Alms, which is 1 white mana for a 1/1 human cleric. It's got first strike, ward 1, and disturb for 3 and a white. So what that means is we can cast this card from our graveyard for its disturb cost, and when we cast it, it will then enter as the backside of the card, which is going to be Chapel Shieldgeist. And Chapel Shieldgeist is a 2/1 spirit cleric that has flying, first strike, and each creature you control has ward 1. Notably, the downside here is if Chapel Shieldgeist would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So we can't keep looping the disturb abilities. We do kind of have that one and done aspect of it. But because the specific wording of disturb is that we may cast the creature, and Vhal allows us to use the mana to cast a spell as long as it's not from our hand, we can actually use Vhal to then cast the disturb cards out of our graveyard. So that is the main focus of what we're trying to do. And that, of course, leads us directly into our second theme, which is casting spells from our graveyard. Now, Vhal, of course, lets us cast those spells from our graveyard, but we want to make sure that we are benefiting from it in some way. And that's where cards like Secrets of the Dead come in, which is 2 and a blue for an enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, draw a card. Because every single disturb is going to be casting a spell, we want to make sure that we always have a handful of cards, because then we can protect our stuff, we can make sure that we can put more things into the graveyard, and then cast more things from the graveyard. So ideally, this puts us in a situation where we're able to basically accrue constant value, being able to constantly cast things, draw cards, and then we have the cards in our hand to hopefully interact with our opponents or protect our own board. And then, of course, finally, we get to the last theme of the deck, which, as I mentioned earlier, we have Chapel Shieldgeist, we have a bunch of other disturb cards, and that they are either humans that turn into spirits, or spirits that turn into enchantments, which means we can have a bit of a spirit theme. Because we can play so many spirits both on the front and back side, we get to run cards like Supreme Phantom, which is 1 in a blue for a 1/3 spirit. It's got flying and simply says other spirits you control get +1/+1. There are quite a bit of spirit synergies in the Azorius colors, so we can really take advantage of that and turn our deck into a slight kindred theme that still focuses heavily on the graveyard and on a pretty underutilized mechanic. So I think all of those themes make this deck pretty unique and at least a ton of fun, in my opinion, to play in a game. With that being said, though, we're going to move on to the next step of our deck tech, which is to take a look at some key cards in the deck. And these are cards that really synergize with what we're trying to do, and in a lot of cases can be win conditions or value engines all on their own. So starting off, our first key card is Drogskol Captain, by far one of the best protection spells for our deck, because it is 1 white-blue for a 2/2 Spirit Soldier. It's got flying, and other spirit creatures you control get +1/+1 and have hexproof. This is a tremendous way to protect our spirits, both for our disturbed spirits and also for our non-disturbed spirits like Supreme Phantom, because if we can give our entire board hexproof, then our opponents either have to deal with the captain before they can deal with some of our bigger threats, or they have to board wipe us. And because we're in the Azorius colors, we do have things like counterspells to prevent board wipes. We have ways to protect our board, maybe give it indestructible, things like that. So this is going to be a very important piece of the deck. Moving on to our second key card. In this case, we have Malevolent Hermit. And this one looks a little bit strange, so bear with me for a second. It is 1 in a blue for a 2/1 human wizard, and it has blue, sacrifice Malevolent Hermit, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 3, then you can disturb it for 2 and a blue. Now, this doesn't look like too much, it's not a spirit, it's just kind of an on-board counter spell, but the nice thing about the Hermit is that it can put itself into the graveyard. So whether or not we expect our opponents to be able to pay for the counter spell, we can always activate it whenever we need to get it into the graveyard, and then disturb it to turn it into Benevolent Geist, which is a 2/2 spirit wizard with flying that says non-creature spells you control can't be countered. And then of course the disturb cost of, if it's put into a graveyard, exile it. So Benevolent Geist, making our non-creature spells uncounterable, means that if we need a board wipe, if we need a counter spell, if we need anything that resolves, we can make sure it hits the board with Benevolent Geist. Now, obviously, this does not stop our creatures from being countered, so that is something to be aware of. But a lot of our support pieces are going to be non-creature spells, whether it's enchantments, artifacts, instants, sorceries. We want to make sure that we have the ability to protect our own things, and Benevolent Geist is a great way to do that. Moving on to our final key card of the deck. This one is River Kelpie. And River Kelpie is 3 blue for a 3/3 beast. Whenever this creature or another permanent enters from a graveyard, draw a card, and whenever a player casts a spell from a graveyard, draw a card, then it has Persist. So if it would die and had no -1/-1 counters, it returns with a -1/-1 counter. This initially doesn't look that much more powerful than Secrets of the Dead, except keeping in mind Secrets of the Dead only triggers on casting from the graveyard. River Kelpie is when something enters or is cast from the graveyard, meaning that it will draw a card when it re-enters with its Persist ability. The additional reason why I wanted to highlight it for the key cards is its interaction with our Noble Heritage, because if we have Noble Heritage in play, and River Kelpie dies and comes back with a -1/-1 counter, we can then use Noble Heritage in our upkeep to put 2 +1/+1 counters on the Kelpie. One of those counters will negate the -1/-1 counter, and so now it has no more -1/-1 counters. So if it dies for persist, it will come back again, allowing us to essentially reuse it every single turn around the table, as long as we're willing to put our noble heritage counters on the River Kelpie. And to be perfectly honest, I think that is a very good strategy. It allows us to guarantee we have that card draw, that flexibility, and that recursion. So that is the end of our key cards section for this week. And the next thing I want to do is talk a little bit about some cool interactions in this deck. And these are cards that synergize really well with each other, but in a lot of cases are just fun cards that I want to highlight. So starting off, our first cool interaction is between Patrician Geist and Thalia's Geist Caller. Patrician Geist, 2 and a blue for a 2/2 Spirit Knight. It has flying. Other spirits you control get +1/+1, and spells you cast from your graveyard cost 1 less to cast. This is, for all intents and purposes, the perfect card for this deck. It's a lord for our spirits, giving them all +1/+1, and it's helping our disturb costs be even cheaper. And when we pair it with Thalia's Geist Caller, it can get out of hand very, very quickly. Because Thalia's Geist Caller is 2 and a white for a 3/1 human cleric. It's got lifelink. Whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, make a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying, and you can sacrifice a spirit to give Thalia's Geist Caller indestructible until the end of turn. The way that these two would work out is essentially Patrician Geist lets us cast spells from our graveyard cheaper, which then triggers the Geist Caller, which makes a spirit, which is then pumped up by the Patrician Geist. So they really just synergize absolutely perfectly with each other and are able to work in ways that really help our deck function, helps us go wide, helps us get more value, and it's a great way for us to churn out a ton of spirits that can then start beating down our opponents. That is, though, not the only cool interaction I want to highlight, and the next one is going to be between Broker's Hideout and Savine's Reclamation. And I know it's weird, I try not to talk too much about lands because I don't think the mana base is typically important outside of a lands deck. However, I do want to highlight this specific interaction because, in my opinion, this is one of the best ways that you can ramp in any white deck. So Broker's Hideout is a land that when it enters the battlefield, you have to sacrifice it. When you do, you search your library for a basic forest, plains, or island, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle, and you gain 1 life. Now, that doesn't seem that great, it just lets us get a basic land and gain a life, but if we have something like Savine's Reclamation, which is 2 and a white for a sorcery, that says return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, you may copy this spell and choose a new target for the copy, then it has flashback for 4 and a white. Being able to play the Broker's Hideout, get a land, gain a life, and then cast Savine's Reclamation to return the Broker's Hideout means we get another land. That is straight up land ramp in Azorius that is repeatable and can quite possibly get us a total of 3 additional lands if we can cast Savine's Reclamation and then also flash it back. So while this doesn't look extremely powerful, this is a synergy that I have put in pretty much any white deck I play at this point and has never really served me wrong. So I wanted to shout this out and make sure that people were aware that if you look at the mana base and you see some fetch lands in there, which not real fetch lands, like very cheap budget fetch lands, this is why they are there, because I do think it's worth running just for the ramp purposes. Anyway, though, that brings us to the end of our cool interactions for this week, and so the last piece of our deck tech is, of course, to take a look at the price of the deck. And this week, the total deck price was just shy of $30 at $29.02, making this quite the budget-friendly deck. And, surprisingly, the most expensive card in the entire deck is actually a land in Fabled Passage at $4.74. So I mentioned just a second ago about Savine's Reclamation and using our fetch lands to ramp. Fabled Passage is one of those fetch lands, but it's not necessary to the deck because all it does is you can tap it, sacrifice it, and search your library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Then if you control 4 or more lands, you untap that land. While this is a very good card, a very good land, and a great land to return from our graveyard to the battlefield, it is in no way necessary for the deck. You could very easily replace this land with just a basic island or plains and just kind of keep going. And if that's the case, that drops this deck price down to about $25, which is not significantly more manageable, but definitely a number that is much more reasonable, considering that's a pretty big chunk of the deck price right there. So I wanted to highlight that, of course, and since we're talking about price, we of course got to talk about some out-of-budget options. Now, this is not going to be a true out-of-budget option because I'm not going to suggest a card that is more than $70. However, it is a card that I think would greatly power up the deck and put you in a situation where the deck can do a little bit more for just a little bit more money. And that card is going to be Umbral Mantle. An Umbral Mantle, 3 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature has 3 untap. This creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and it equips for 0. Now, you might be thinking, why would we include this? We don't really have a ton of untap or tap synergies, but to be perfectly honest, this card goes infinite with Vhal immediately. Because the way that Vhal is worded is not that we can't use her mana to not cast spells, it's that we can't use her mana to cast spells from our hand. We can still use her mana to activate abilities. So if we put the Umbral Mantle on Vhal, we can now tap Vhal for 3 mana immediately, and then use that 3 mana to untap her with Umbral Mantle. That then gives her +2/+2, meaning she now taps for 5. We use 3 to untap, she now taps for 7. This immediately gives us an infinite amount of colorless mana. Now, again, that is colorless, we can't use it for everything, but there is a very good chance that if we can make infinite mana with Vhal, and notably also make her infinitely large, which is pretty powerful on a creature that has vigilance, then we can probably just win the game. That means we can flash back a ton of stuff, we can disturb a ton of stuff, and put ourselves in a situation where there's not much our opponents are going to be able to do to stop us. With that being said, this is technically an infinite combo, even though it does not win the game immediately. You do have to attack or use it to cast spells, but it is worth noting, so if you are not a fan of infinite combos, then I would recommend just don't put Umbral Mantle in, which is exactly why I didn't put it in the first place, but I did want to highlight this in case people weren't aware. Now, with that being said, if you are putting Umbral Mantle into the deck, you do have to take a card out of the deck, and the card I would recommend taking out is Shipwreck Sifters, which is 1 and a blue for a 1/2 spirit. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card, then discard a card, and whenever you discard a spirit card or a card with Disturb, put a +1/+1 counter on Shipwreck Sifters. This is a card that wound up in the deck very early on in the building process, and it was before I realized we didn't really have a ton of ways to discard cards. My hope was that this would be a 2-mana threat that just grew as the game went on, but as I kind of started to play it, I realized that it more often than not was just a 2-mana 2/3, being able to trigger itself when it entered the battlefield, and that was kind of all it was ever going to be. And if we're just playing a 2-mana 2/3 that is on theme, I don't think that's really what we want to be doing, especially when the alternative is going infinite with Umbral Mantle. So with that being said, I think that this is still a decent card, and I think that if you wanted to lean more into the discard synergies, you certainly could, but I don't think it's perfect when compared to Umbral Mantle. That, though, brings us to the end of our deck tech for today, and before we get into a game with this deck, because obviously we gotta see how this game can perform, I want to take a second to shout out some of our current patrons and channel members, and remind everybody, if you're interested in supporting the channel a little bit more directly, because all of this is run and done by myself. I do all of the recording, the editing, the building of the decks. So if you would like to support me in this endeavor, I really would appreciate it. You can check us out over on Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, or right here on YouTube as a channel member. But with those quick shoutouts out of the way, let's take a look at our opponents for this week and see who we might be trying to disturb in a game of Commander. So, obviously, we have 3 opponents this week, starting off with Cole playing his King Makar the Gold Cursed deck. Then we have Doodle with Jin Sakai, Ghost of Tsushima, and Bilal with Tanuk Memorial Ensign. So with Cole, his King Makar deck is a vehicle deck, and more recently, a starship. That's probably not the word, but I don't remember the official type of the artifacts, the spacecraft, the things that can station. So King Makar cares about untapping, and one thing that Cole has done a phenomenal job with this deck is finding plenty of ways to tap and untap King Makar, essentially allowing him to just control the state of the board. This is a deck that I have lost to plenty of times. I've lost a lot of creatures to. It is a very powerful deck, and because a lot of our cards want to go to the graveyard, the fact that he can exile them is definitely a concern and probably makes him the biggest threat at the table, in my opinion. Moving on to Doodle and his Jin Sakai deck. This is a brand new deck from Doodle, but I am very excited to see what it can do. He's really leaning pretty hard on Myriad because he wants to make sure that whenever a creature he controls attacks, he can give it either double strike or unblockable, and then draw some cards with Jin Sakai or things like Coastal Piracy, and it's a very unique take on the Esper colors, which I think is very cool because I've been very vocal about not liking the Esper colors in the past, so I'm glad to see Doodle bringing something unique to the table with this. And then last but not least, we have Bilal and his Tanuk deck, and this is pretty much what it looks like. This is a landfall deck, but knowing Bilal, I'm sure he's found some unique synergies to build around the damage that Tanuk can do, because I imagine if you cast something like Scapeshift and get a ton of lands into play at once, you can probably start knocking people out of the game very quickly. And Bilal is a very good player, very good lands player as well, so I'm excited to see what he can bring, but definitely a little bit worried as well. So those are our opponents for this week. If you have any predictions for the game, please do put those in the comments below. I love seeing who people think are going to win. And as always, if you haven't already, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. That does help out quite a bit. But with all that being said, let's jump into this game, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Cole goes first, followed by myself, Doodle, and then Bilal. On Cole's first turn, he plays a swamp. I play a Desert of the True. Doodle plays a shadowy backstreet, surveilling 1. Bilal plays a Game Trail. Cole plays a swamp and casts Arcane Signet. I play an island and cast Devoted Graphkeeper, milling myself for 2, and letting me tap target creature whenever I cast a spell from my graveyard. Doodle plays a Sea Chrome Coast. Bilal plays a mountain, casts a Soul Ring, then uses the Soul Ring to cast a Mossborn Hydra, which enters with a +1/+1 counter and doubles the counters on it whenever a land enters under his control. Cole plays a Command Tower and casts Caustic Bronco, which has Saddle 3, and whenever it attacks, Cole reveals the top card of his library, putting it into his hand. Then he loses life equal to the card's mana value if the Bronco isn't saddled, and if it is saddled, each of his opponents lose that much life instead. After that resolves, Cole casts a Mind Stone. On my turn, I play an island and cast Cat-like Curiosity for its disturb cost from my graveyard, enchanting the Graphkeeper, so now I get to draw a card whenever it deals combat damage to a player. Since I cast a spell from my graveyard, I also tap Bilal's Hydra, so I can attack him for 2, drawing a card with the Graphkeeper when it deals damage. Doodle plays an island and casts Dalek Squadron, which has Menace and Myriad. Bilal casts his commander, Tanuk Memorial Ensign, doing 1 damage to each opponent whenever a land enters under his control, and drawing a card if it's the second time that ability has resolved in a turn. Then he plays a forest, doubling the counters on the Hydra and doing 1 damage to each opponent, and finally casts an Arcane Signet and passes. Cole moves straight to combat, attacking me for 2 with Caustic Bronco, revealing a swamp from the top of his library, putting it into his hand and losing no life. Then he casts Ancient Craving, drawing 3 cards and losing 3 life, and also casts Springleaf Drum, allowing him to tap it and an untapped creature he controls to make a mana of any color. On my turn I play an island and attack Cole for 2 with the Graphkeeper, drawing a card. Then, in my second main phase, I cast my commander, Vhal Candlekeep Researcher, which can tap for colorless mana equal to her toughness, but only to cast spells from anywhere other than my hand. Doodle plays a Plains and casts Mirror Room, creating a token copy of his Dalek Squadron. Then he attacks me for 3 with the original Dalek, creating a token copy attacking each of his other opponents, doing 3 damage to each of us. Bilal cast Escape to the Wilds, exiling the top 5 cards of his library, being able to play them until the end of his next turn, and letting him play an additional land this turn. This has him exiling a mountain, War Room, Angrath's Marauders, and 2 forests. Then he plays a forest, doing 1 damage to each opponent and doubling the counters on the Hydra. Before that can resolve though, Doodle casts Swords to Plowshares, exiling the Hydra and letting Bilal gain 2 life since it has 2 power. After that, Bilal plays a War Room, doing another damage to each opponent and drawing a card. Cole plays a Swamp and casts the Eternity Elevator, which can tap for 3 mana and has Station, gaining the ability to tap for mana equal to the number of charge counters on it once it reaches 20 charge counters. After that, Cole casts his commander, King Makar the Gold Cursed, allowing him to exile target creature and create a gold token whenever he untaps. Finally, he basic land cycles an Ash Barrens, discarding it to search his library for a basic land, putting it into his hand, and uses King Makar to station the elevator, putting 2 charge counters on it. On my turn, I move straight to combat, attacking Cole for 4 with both of my creatures, drawing a card. Then, in my second main phase, I play a Temple of Enlightenment, scrying 1, and cast my background, Noble Heritage, letting each player put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control in my upkeep, but giving me protection from each opponent who chooses to put the counters on their creature until my next turn. Doodle plays a Vault of Champions and casts Glasspool Mimic, having it enter as another copy of the Dalek Squadron. Then he attacks Bilal for 6 with 2 Daleks, triggering Myriad and doing 6 damage to each other opponent as well. On Bilal's turn, he casts Angrath's Marauders, now doubling the damage that sources he controls would deal. This lets him play a forest and do 2 damage to each opponent. When Cole untaps King Makar for his turn, he exiles Doodle's Glasspool Mimic and creates a gold token. He then attacks Doodle for 2 with Caustic Bronco, revealing Flare of Malice from the top of his library, putting it into his hand and losing 4 life. Then in his second main phase, Cole casts Battle at the Bridge for X = 8, giving Angrath's Marauders -8/-8, killing it and gaining 8 life. He also plays a Swamp, and at the end of turn, I cast Think Twice, drawing a card. In my upkeep, I put 2 +1/+1 counters on Vhal, Bilal puts 2 counters on Tanuk, and Cole puts 2 counters on King Makar, giving me protection from everyone but Doodle until my next turn. Once that resolves, I move to combat and attack Doodle for 6 with both of my creatures, also drawing a card. Then in my second main phase, I play an escape tunnel and cast River Kelpie, which has Persist, and lets me draw a card whenever a permanent enters from a graveyard or a spell is cast from the graveyard. After that, I tap Vhal for 5 mana to cast Whale Drifter from the graveyard for its disturb cost, drawing a card and tapping King Makar. Doodle plays a Path of Ancestry and casts his commander, Jin Sakai Ghost of Tsushima, now drawing a card when he deals combat damage, and whenever Doodle attacks a player and no other creature is attacking that player, he can choose to either give that creature double strike or unblockable until the end of turn. This lets him attack Bilal and Cole both with a Dalek, triggering Myriad and Jin Sakai, giving them both double strike. This results in Cole and Bilal both taking 9, while I take 6. On Bilal's turn, he casts Tireless Provisioner, letting him make a food or treasure token whenever a land enters under his control. Then he plays a mountain, doing a damage to each opponent and making a food token. Finally, he activates War Room, paying 2 life and drawing a card. When Cole untaps for his turn, he uses King Makar to exile Tanuk, but in response, Bilal casts Veil of Summer, giving his permanents hexproof from black and blue this turn, keeping his commander and preventing Cole from making a gold token. Then, Cole uses King Makar to saddle the Caustic Bronco and attacks Doodle for 2, revealing Sting the Glinting Dagger, making each opponent lose 2 life. Then Doodle blocks with Jin Sakai, and before damage, Cole sacrifices the Caustic Bronco to cast Flare of Malice, forcing each opponent to sacrifice the creature with the greatest mana value among creatures they control. This winds up killing Tanuk, Jin Sakai, and River Kelpie, which returns to play with a -1/-1 counter thanks to Persist, letting me draw a card. Then, in his second main phase, Cole casts Sting the Glinting Dagger and immediately equips it to King Makar, giving him +1/+1, haste, and untapping him at the beginning of each combat. In my upkeep, Noble Heritage triggers, and I'm the only one who puts counters on a creature, putting 2 +1/+1 counters on River Kelpie, which, importantly, cancels out the -1/-1 counter on it so Persist can trigger again the next time it dies. I then play a Port Town, revealing an island so it comes into play untapped, and move to combat so Cole untaps King Makar and exiles Doodle's original Dalek Squadron and makes a gold token. After that, I attack Cole for 2 with Whale Drifter, and attack Doodle for 6 with Vhal and the Graph Keeper, drawing a card. Then, in my second main phase, I disturb Morning Apparition, drawing a card and tapping Doodle's Dalek, and disturb Ancestor's Embrace, enchanting Morning Apparition, giving it lifelink, drawing a card, and again tapping Doodle's Dalek. Finally, I disturb Luminous Phantom, drawing a card, tapping the Dalek, and now letting me gain a life whenever another creature I control leaves the battlefield. At the end of turn, Cole uses Springleaf Drum to tap King Makar and make a black mana. In response, I sacrifice my Escape Tunnel to search my library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. Doodle plays a Godless Shrine, paying 2 life so that it comes into play untapped. Then he moves to combat, so Cole untaps King Makar, exiling Vhal, gaining me a life and making himself a gold token. After that resolves, Doodle attacks Cole for 3 with the Dalek, triggering Myriad and doing 3 damage to each other opponent as well. Then in his second main phase, Doodle recasts his commander Jin Sakai. On Bilal's turn, he cast Rampaging Baloths, now creating a 4/4 beast token whenever a land enters under his control. This lets him play a Raging Ravine, making a beast and a treasure token. Finally, he recasts his commander Tanuk and passes. Cole plays a Swamp and then casts Damnable Pact for X equals 14, forcing me to draw 14 cards and lose 14 life. In an attempt to save myself, I flash back Prismatic Strands to prevent all damage black sources would deal this turn, drawing a card with River Kelpie. I also flash back Think Twice, drawing 2 total cards. Unfortunately, none of them can stop the Damnable Pact, so I draw 14 cards, lose 14 life, and get knocked out of the game. On Doodle's turn, he moves straight to combat, so Cole untaps King Makar, exiles the final Dalek, and makes a gold token. Then, Doodle attacks Bilal with Jin Sakai for 2, making his commander unblockable. Also before damage, Doodle casts Enduring Curiosity, now letting him draw a card whenever a creature he controls deals combat damage to an opponent. This lets him deal 2 damage to Bilal and draw 2 cards. On Bilal's turn, he activates War Room, paying 2 life to draw a card, then moves to combat, attacking Cole for 10 with his Baloths and Beast token, and attacking Doodle for 5 with Tanuk and Tireless Provisioner. This forces Cole to block with King Makar, killing his commander but only taking 4 damage, while Doodle blocks with Enduring Curiosity, killing both the Glimmer and the Provisioner, taking 2 damage and returning the Curiosity to Doodle's control as an enchantment. In his second main phase, Bilal casts Tendershoot Dryad, now making a 1/1 Saproling in each upkeep if he has the City's Blessing, which he does, and he also gives his Saprolings +2/+2. In Cole's upkeep, Bilal creates a Saproling token, then Cole plays a Swamp and recasts his commander, King Makar, immediately re-equipping him with Sting and using him to station the Eternity Elevator. In Doodle's upkeep, Bilal creates another Saproling token, then Doodle plays a Shipwreck Marsh, and moves to combat, so Cole untaps King Makar, exiling Tanuk and making a gold token. After that, Doodle attacks Bilal for 2 with Jin Sakai, making him unblockable and drawing 2 cards when he deals combat damage. In his second main phase, Doodle casts Brood Birth Viper, which has Myriad, and lets him draw a card when it deals combat damage to an opponent. At the end of turn, Cole taps King Makar to float a black mana. In Bilal's upkeep, he creates a Saproling token, and then casts O'Hare Axonil, Deepest Might, now making all his red non-combat damage equal to 4 since O'Hare's power is 4. After that, he recasts his commander Tanuk and plays a Dryad Arbor, making a food, doing 4 damage to each opponent, and knocking Cole out of the game. Finally, Bilal is able to attack Doodle for 16 total damage with his entire board, doing more than enough even after blocks to knock Doodle out, winning Bilal the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. I was very impressed with how our deck performed in that game. Even though we didn't win and we got knocked out first, I think that the amount of value we accrued throughout the course of the game was very impressive for a $30 deck. And also for a Disturb deck, because if we're being honest, Disturb does not see a ton of play in Commander, and that's kind of for a reason. It's not a very powerful mechanic, there's not a ton of very powerful cards that use it, but I think in our deck it works very well. So I was very happy with how the deck performed, and like I said, it's pretty cheap. So if you're looking to pick up a fun deck that's not going to break the bank, this would be a deck I would recommend. Talking about our opponents though, if we start off with our first player at the table, Cole, his deck performed very well. He did get a little bit unlucky. He got very mana flooded by the end of the game and kept drawing swamp after swamp after swamp. And so that really put him in a position where he had so much mana and just nothing to do with it, which led to him eventually getting run over by Tanuk. Doodle's deck also performed very well, but ran into a bit of a similar situation, except kind of in the opposite direction. Instead of getting flooded with his lands, he got flooded with very powerful creatures, but they needed to untap to be able to live up to their full potential. And because King Makar sat on the board the entire game, Doodle had a lot of those powerful creatures stranded in his hand because he knew if he cast them and put them into play that they would immediately get exiled by the king. So a little bit unfortunate from Doodle's deck, but hopefully we do get to see Jin Sakai again in the future because I think that deck was super sweet. And then last but not least, of course, our winner of the game. So congratulations to Bilal and to Nuke for pulling that one out. Definitely a situation where Bilal kind of sat back for the most part, accrued a little bit of value, and put himself in a situation where when he was able to drop the O'Hare Axonil, he was able to just do a ton of damage immediately and start knocking people out, which I think was a very cool take on it. I would not have considered the fact that you could double to Nuke's damage output. I would have just definitely focused in on playing as many lands as possible. So once again, Bilal proving that he is a phenomenal deck builder and a player as well. So huge shout out to Bilal for winning. Huge shout out to all of my opponents for joining. Had a ton of fun. Really enjoyed this game. And of course, as always, if you have any suggestions for this deck or suggestions for cards you would like to see built around in the future, please do drop those in the comments. I do my best to try to get to all of them, but I am, of course, a little bit behind in my deck building given the recent break that I took. So with all that being said, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all for liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.